there's a great feeling in these overcoming these difficult things, because life is never this just constant state of I'm at a 9 all day, and when I'm with my wife I hit 10, yay, and I stay like that. That's not real. What's real is like you saying that you went to this monastery and felt all this angst about meditating and being alone and not having your phone and not having the input, but then when it comes out of it, then you have this reward. So you push through this, and you had these uncomfortable feelings, and you came out of those uncomfortable feelings with this newfound appreciation for time and this respect for your own existence in your own space and carving out 3 hours for yourself a day. That's where it all comes from. It all comes from life lessons, and the lessons are learned through struggle. And I think that there's a lot of people out there that think somehow or another you're going to get to some place where you're living in silk sheets and you're getting your toes done while someone's dropping grapes into your mouth. I don't want that. I've never wanted that. That guy's not going to be happy. He's going to be bored. An hour into the grapes, you're going to get those fucking grapes away from me. Stop painting my toes. What am I doing in this bed? I got to do something. I'm not stimulated. The human organism, the animal that we are, needs constant stimulation because it evolved trying to find food and escape enemies, and find shelter, escape nature, escape the elements, try to survive. And this is the great joy that you have in taking care of your children, that you can protect your children from the elements and the enemies and feed them. And it's also the great sadness that you see in losers. When I see a loser, I see some guy who's 43 years old, lives in his parents' basement, and he fucking hates the world. I'm like, that was a baby. Man, this is a baby that somebody just gave shitty nutrients to, whether it's nutrients in the forms of food or in the form of thoughts and ideas and examples. And this kid developed these horrible, self-defeating patterns of behavior that have led them to this point where they're this middle-aged person with no future and no idea of how to get out of this rut, and probably never will escape it, and might just wind up sucking on a gun. You know, I mean, this is the world that we live in today. And I think part of that world is because we have been fed this line of horseshit that you're supposed to seek comfort. And I don't think you are. I think you're supposed to seek lessons, and you're supposed to seek difficult tasks and accomplishments. And through those things, and through doing things that are hard to do, even if it's just a fucking 90-minute hot yoga class. I do a 90-minute yoga class, man. Those last 20 minutes, I do not want to be there, man. And I definitely don't want to give 100%. And I can cheat. I can kind of half-ass it. I can. But if I don't, and I get through it, when that time is up and the lady says namaste and everybody gets up, I'm like, fuck, man, I made it. You know, I lost 15 pounds. My fucking yoga mat is drenched to the point where I could literally wring it out and fill a jug up with water. But through that struggle, I will now have a better day, and I better fucking do it again tomorrow or do something else, because if I just think, well, tomorrow I'm just going to coast and eat Twinkies and watch TV. Oh, hello, sadness, my old friend. Hello, depression. Because when you're not doing anything, you feel like shit. And that's just a part of being a human being. And we can pretend that we're something other than what we really are, and we can pretend, nah, me, man, I'm just cool, just chilling, doing nothing. Bullshit. You're a fucking human. You're a human being. You evolved from the fucking hundreds of thousands of years of hunters and gatherers and people that were struggling. Those human reward systems are carved deeply into your DNA. And if you don't respect that, if you don't respect the mechanism of happiness and fulfillment and what you really need to do in order to feel satisfied in life, camaraderie, love, family, friendship, struggle, testing yourself, learning, all those things are imperative. They're all a giant part of being a person.
I love it. That was amazing. And I'm thinking in my head, am I checking those boxes as you're talking? And am I living my life like that, you know? And yeah, I agree with you.
Sounds like you are.
I am. Yeah,
you
no,
know?
I feel
and
like
we all waver, right? We all have days in and days out.
Absolutely.
But to be reinforced.
Yep. And I feel like, you know, as I'm listening to you talk about that, I'm literally going through like the last 10 years of my life, you know, and when I lived with David, when I went on the monastery, all these things, they're all about getting an edge and doing what you know, and I think it's like part of being human. And that stuff makes me feel the most alive too. You know, like that just makes me feel alive.
Yeah. You know, and also like little improvements over things. That's why doing difficult things is good, whether it's running. So like if you're running and you could run 2 miles and then one day you get it up to 3. It's like, fuck, I remember when I struggled with 2. Now I can do 4. Little improvements. And you really see that in yoga class, and in particular for me, because I'm not good at it. So when I do a yoga class and I can hold a pose until like you're holding these poses for a minute. And if you could stand on one foot, grabbing your other foot and lifting it above your head and keep your arm out straight and your balance and your foot's on fire and your core is engaged. But if you can get to the point where they say stop, you feel like, wow, I didn't used to be able to do that. I used to be able to hold it for 10 seconds and then I would fall down. And then I'd have to start all over again and start from scratch. There's little improvements where you feel yourself getting a little better at something, whether it's jujitsu or anything else. Just little improvements, I think, are what life is all about. And I think also they're a tool to feed the mind, because I really believe the mind needs these little lessons. The mind needs these little tasks. And if your brain doesn't get that, I think it atrophies and it gets depressed. And it's like I think that's half of what a lot of people's sadness is this lack of stimulation and reward, lack of these peaks and valleys. And this bullshit idea that we're constantly fed that you should be comfortable.
If you encountered an obstacle, 2 things happen at the same time, and one is that your movement forward to your specific goal or sets of goals is blocked. But the second thing that happens is you're faced with a mystery, and the mystery is this thing wasn't supposed to exist, but it does exist. So what implication does that have for everything I think? And that's very, very hard on people. They do not like that at all, and no wonder, because it's the constrained chaos that's underneath everything, inhibited by your contextual knowledge, that suddenly popped its head up into your world. It's like the shark in the movie Jaws, which is of course a mythological story. It's exactly that, and it's exactly what that movie signified. A safe vacation paradise, all of a sudden threatened by some subterranean thing that can pull you down and that destroys the peace and the harmony of that particular community. It's a dragon story. It's a hero myth. It's the story that people have been telling forever. So and what you can think of that thing that reemerges, that shark that rises up from the depths, or that whale, or that dragon, or that predator, or the foreign invader for that matter, or the barbarian. They all fit into the same category. That's what had been deemed irrelevant suddenly manifesting itself. And when you think about how much is deemed irrelevant, the fact that it suddenly manifests itself, that's exactly the purpose for the reason for the trauma. It's like, well, I've eradicated from my conceptualizations 99.99% of everything. It's zeroed out. And all of a sudden I've made a mistake. Bang, I don't know where I am. Well, what's relevant when you don't know where you are? And the answer to that is, since you don't know, everything is relevant. And you can imagine the sort of terror that people who experience paranoid schizophrenia are living in perennially, because what happens to them is precisely that. They undergo neurophysiological transformations that makes everything that they once depended on disappear, and everything comes back as relevant. And that puts them in the early stages of schizophrenia. That's extraordinarily stressful neurophysiologically. So they're overwhelmed with cortisol, and their brains deteriorate as a consequence of that. It's just too much. So, and unsurprisingly, right, because you can hardly deal with anything, let alone with everything. Now, and often what you see, and it's rarely conceptualized this way in the training of clinical therapists, but often what you see when you are dealing with people who are in crisis isn't people who have a mental illness. In fact, in my experience, that's actually quite rare. What's far more common is that the person that you're talking to has become overwhelmed by catastrophe. So their life has fallen apart in some way that makes what they're doing actually impossible. You know, so maybe someone very close to them in their family that they were depending on has developed a very serious illness, and that's thrown their entire financial state into utter chaos. Or maybe they've developed a condition that makes it impossible for them to work. Or, you know, you can imagine the potential range of catastrophes. And they're coming to see you because they're anxious and depressed, but the reason they're anxious and depressed is because everything they have ignored has popped its head back up and is hell-bent on their destruction. And often you see people who are being attacked by 5 or 6 of these monsters at the same time. And it isn't their mental illness that stops them from being able to deal with it, although that, you know, whatever weaknesses you have are going to interfere. It's the fact that what they're facing is no damn joke, and if you were facing it, you'd feel exactly the same way. So then you're trying to come up with practical solutions to these tremendously complex problems. And that's a very, well, it's extraordinarily difficult, generally speaking. People often don't come to a therapist until they've exhausted their entire range of resources. They cannot figure out what to do. And so, you know, in a situation like that, you can administer antidepressants, and maybe that'll help the person increase their stress resistance. But and it may be that because they're depressed and have been brought down, that they are in fact exaggerating the danger of some of the smaller monsters that are after them. But making the person more stress resilient doesn't give them, for example, a new job, and it certainly doesn't bring back the person they've been living with for 2 years who has a degenerating neurological disease or some form of cancer. Like, these things are major. You know, I often see people who, well, they're in a relationship, maybe they're rather isolated, older people. One of the partners is dying and their entire financial situation has become catastrophic. It's like, that's not a mental illness, man. I mean, they may have got into that situation because of one inadequacy or another, but you don't even want to push that too far, because that sort of thing can happen to anyone, and will in fact happen to most people in one form or another, at least at some point in their lives. So you want to be damn prepared for that. You want to be prepared for that, because it's bitter and harsh and anxiety provoking and painful. But if you're not ready, then it's also hell. And often you can stop things from becoming hell, even though you can't stop them from being bitter and painful and anxiety provoking and all of that. You can at least delimit the catastrophe enough so that it doesn't permanently bring you and the people around you down. And that's not so bad, right? That's a hell, or at least it's a lot better than the alternative. So this is the problem, you know. Things object, things are obstacles. Well, how big is the obstacle? It's the same question as how big is the predator that's lurking outside the door of our cave. It's exactly the same problem, except conceptualized abstractly, and I would say exactly the same systems that your distant ancestors used to conceptualize the lurking predator are the systems that are activated now when you encounter the re-emergence of all the monsters that you've ignored. It's the same neurological platform. You think, well, how could it be otherwise? Because evolution is a conservative process. Everything about you is built on ancient foundations, right? Very little new, certainly very little radically new, comes into existence. It's mostly tinkering with structures that have been around forever, like your body plan, for example. That's unbelievably old. I mean, you share that with lizards, roughly speaking. So it's incredibly ancient.